CLINE'S Nursery. We want to thank CLINE'S Nursery and Andrea Rogers for arranging this opportunity today so that you can learn more about North Carolina native plants. I'm Tony Turner. I'm an extension master gardener volunteer, and just to tell you briefly what that is, we work through Cleveland County Extension Office, and we are trained. We're a network of trained volunteers across the state. We're dedicated to learning and sharing information, researched information, not exactly what your papa might have said or your family traditions. They may have, if they have tried and proved that, then it becomes part of the research to enhance our community through horticulture. And we like to connect people. You know, it's been really an opportunity for me since retirement to be able to make new friendships and be with people who like the same things that I do. So it's been a great experience. Currently there's 84 cooperative extension offices across the state that offer the Master Gardener program. And if you're interested or need some more information, I've got some information and applications right here. Who can be a Master Gardener? Anybody who loves gardening. You don't have to have any former experience or any former education. If you love gardening, then you're qualified. So that was a bonus for me because I'm always intimidated with that education piece of it. So our next Master Gardener course starts September the 7th, and it's virtual and in person this year. So one day a week you will do the in-class learning, and then your coursework will be virtual, which is different from in the past. So it's really a better opportunity, I think, for a lot of people with their work schedules to be able to accomplish this year. So if you're interested, you can contact Julie Flowers at the Cooperative Extension Office, and I have her number and information on these applications right here. So a little education piece before we start. If you have a cell phone with you, will you yank it out just real fast, and then we'll put them up. How many of you are on Facebook? And how many of you already like the Cooperative Extension Office of Cleveland County? I'm going to tell you what address to put in there on Facebook, so go on Facebook. And then search for Extension Master Gardener Association of Cleveland County. And when you get that, if you will like that page, then you'll get notifications when we're talking somewhere, and then just routinely information will pop up. There's been a lot of information about native plants on there recently. When your garden season was in, there was a lot of information that popped up about garden pests, especially that little pesky squash vine borer that almost gets my squash every year. So it's a really good way to keep up with that information. All right, second item. Go to your internet and research Plant Toolbox. And when you have that, let me know. Now, you'll probably get some pictures of toolboxes at first. That's not the one I want you to click on. I want you to click on the one that's NC Extension Gardener, blah, blah, blah. When you find it, there's a little search bar up there at the top. I want you to type in the words butterfly weed. Weed. The Plant Toolbox is a database that has been created in the last couple years by master gardeners in North Carolina State Extension, and it has almost every plant that you can think of populated in there with copious amounts of information about what zone it grows in, what kind of soil it likes, whether it likes shade or sun, what is its growing habit, what are its pests, do deer like it, you know, those kind of things. So when you find butterfly weed, when you go home, read as much about it as you can. And butterfly weed is a native plant, and we have some right here that CLINE'S has potted up for us, and I want that to be a gift as you go home. But you need an education in butterfly weed. Butterfly weed is a host plant for the monarchs, and it's one of the host plants, the milkweed plants for the monarchs. If there's no milkweed in our landscape of this type, or there's other types, there's no monarchs. So this is a real important plant to put in your landscape. So here's a gift. Make sure that you get this gift today before you leave. It's been my campaign this year to bring back the monarchs, so I'm doing everything possible within my little ability to put more of these plants in the landscape all over the county. So I want you to help me with that campaign. So back to the program. You can put your cell phones up. So we have several other master gardeners presenting today. We have Cindy Briggs right here. Cindy's going to be talking about what native plants are and why plant natives. And then we have Susie Brown. Where's Susie? Susie right here. She's going to talk about the peculiarities of native plants and what you should do when you're selecting them, the things that you should consider. And then last, to tie it all up, is Dr. Jean Pat Carr, right here on the front in the pretty mint green, landscaping with native plants. So that's all I have, and we'll begin. Cindy.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk about what native plants are, and so I want to give you a definitions. Native plants are species that have evolved naturally. They have been growing in our region, which in our case would be the southeast region of the United States, and developed and adapted to the local climate and conditions for thousands and thousands of years. So native plants were here before the ships started coming over from Europe, okay? So they evolved through natural forces or by the activities of animals or humans, in that case Native Americans, and they lived and reproduced on their own. Now this is the most important thing you're going to hear today, and Tony's already talked about it. Most importantly, native plants fit with other native flora, other plants, bushes, trees, and fauna, okay, other animals. Some examples of native plants are up here, okay, purple coneflowers, butterfly weed, bee balm, I mean they're all over. So these are wonderful plants to plant in your garden. Not all plants growing within our region are native plants. These plants are called non-native or exotics. Non-native plants evolved in other parts of the world or other parts of the United States and were brought here in some manner. Most importantly, they don't exist or coexist with native flora and fauna. Okay, there's no relationship between them. Non-native plants that reproduce and establish outside of their native range are called naturalized plants. Naturalized plants, they don't need any human help for maintenance and reproduction. They've adapted to the new native range. Can anybody think of two naturalized plants that we have here that are non-native? No, I think they're native.
They're native to the mountains, and I think
they're
they've
native
moved them
to the
down
mountain
here.
region. Yeah. One would be Queen Anne's lace, which I see all the time, and the other one is the orange daylily. So the ditch lily, yes. Okay. Well, we'll talk about Bradford pears in a minute. So, a small percentage of plants that were brought into North Carolina have become damaging. These non-native species invade natural areas and destroy ecosystems, and they're known as invasive species. Can anybody give, well, someone just gave me an invasive Bradford pear. Japanese honeysuckle, English ivy, kudzu. Why are these damaging? What does it do?
That's English ivy.
Yep. Yep.
That's if let go. That's what English ivy will do. And it'll destroy your beautiful oak trees.
It smothers.
It smothers it. And so does kudzu. It smothers. Yeah. Yeah. We have kudzu in the area that I live in, and people are constantly trying to cut it back. And with the English ivy, in my yard, I've been working constantly and trying to get rid of it. So the most important thing we can do as gardeners is try to eradicate these things and manage them as best we can, because we can see what happens when we do that. Okay? So, from what I've said so far, why should we be planting natives? Anybody want to take it?
Because they are better equipped to battle the invasives.
Well, they're better.
Plus they support them.
Butterflies and
Okay, so number one, yep, just as you said, they support the other flora and fauna in the ecosystem. And what you want is you want biodiversity in your ecosystem, and they're supporting everything. They're supporting insects, they're supporting reptiles, amphibians, mammals. All of this is sort of like a circle that they're supporting each other. Non-natives don't do that as well, or they don't do it really. The natives do that. The second thing is, because they're native plants, they're used to the insects. So the need for insecticide automatically increases because they are used to the insects that are around them. The third thing, they're adapted to the insects in the environment. So the need for insecticide decreases automatically if you have native plants. The third thing you want to think about is native plants are extremely hardy. They're very used to the conditions of the region that they've been in for thousands and thousands of years. So you're not going to have to maintain them in the same way that you would have to maintain a non-native plant or an exotic plant, watering and things like that. They still would love the tender loving care, but it's not going to be something that you're constantly trying to do with a non-native plant. And what else? I've already talked about the fact that they provide food and shelter for all of the other natives, all the other animals within the ecosystem. And lastly, native plants are less likely to escape, just as you said, and become nuisance and become invasive plants. So, any questions before I turn it to Susie Brown? Okay, Susie, you're up.
Okay. While Susie's coming up, I'll mention that recently one of our master gardeners is ill and in the hospital, and we were cleaning up her yard, and I collected some Baptisia seeds, and so I went to the Toolbox to learn about that plant, and I found out that that plant actually, because it's native, takes nitrogen from the air and puts nitrogen in the soil, so it's not only good for itself, but for all the other plants that you plant around it. So it's just amazing that you can do something good for the environment by putting native plants. And when you plant your landscape, you have a bigger mission in mind other than planting plants. You're supporting habitats and just the ongoing of what our area was naturally like in the beginning. So you're doing something really big.
Purple or yellow flowers that come in a different color. I've seen purple, real deep, beautiful purple, and also a real bright yellow. So it's really pretty in your landscape if you decide to plant it. What I'm going to talk about is how we decide what we're going to plant. So I brought some all-important little tags. If you'll take a couple and pass them around. because these contain so much information about what we want to plant, right? What we've got to figure out is how we use that information and translate it into where do I put this in my yard, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Is going to be my focus. How do we choose our plant? How do we choose our place? Make sure those two work together so that our plant thrives. I don't know about you, but I don't want my plant just to survive and it's hanging on by a thread. I want it to be in a place that makes it happy, because there it's going to be robust. It's going to have great growth and blossoms and flowers and be a robust looking plant, as opposed to a good example I'm going to just talk about real quick first is this. If you've ever been to the coast, you'll see this growing in sand. No care, no water, no nothing. Yes, we can plant it here, but if you plant this in a place that's going to get irrigated every morning, it's got thick clay soil, how do you think this is going to do? You're going to care for it to death. You're going to over care for it, and that is harmful to it. So some of these plants, that's what we like about them. They don't require a lot of care, they don't require a lot of water, so you don't want to over care for things that you're getting because they're low maintenance, because some of them cannot thrive and or survive in that situation. Okay, the first mantra of plant selection is right plant, right place, which is what I'm talking about, and also what I call the survive versus die versus thrive concept. Those are two things you want to keep in mind as you're picking your spot and picking your plant. Now on these plant tags you have lots of information. You can also use books, like several of us master gardeners use the Southeast Plant Primer, which was written by Dr. Mellencamp, who was Professor Emeritus at UNCC, was instrumental in getting the native plant garden and the botanical gardens there. So you can do research anywhere you go. We're so lucky now to have the internet, because you can just type in a plant. None of us know all the plants, none of us know all their care, but we've got places we can go and we know where to look to find that information, which is key, which is what Tony shared with you too about the plant toolbox, because that's been done by Extension Office. They want things that grow and have lived in North Carolina forever, and let's bring those things back. First thing it's going to say on your plant tag is your botanical name and your common name. I usually don't know botanical names. They're helpful, but I know common names, and most people if you talk to in the nursery are going to know more of the common name. Like what I mentioned with blanket flower. Some people might not know it's Hydrangea Aborissas, right? But can I go ask for a blanket flower and I'm going to get one? Yeah. So know what you need to know, but you don't have to know everything about everything. Next thing it's going to tell you on your plant tag is how tall it gets, which is important when you're planting your landscape. Is this flower, because I had this happen to me and I didn't do a good planting job, but I wanted to get this in the ground before it died. I had a 2-inch pot with like 2 little leaves like this, and it was called a split leaf Rudbeckia. Okay, and I kind of looked it up and I thought, well, I know about black-eyed Susans, the Rudbeckia. I don't really need to research this a lot. Well, I put it in a place where it's getting a lot of sun, and guess how tall it is? It grew from this. It's like 8 feet tall. So that's a plant that I get to go in and replant and put somewhere else, because where I put it didn't take into account for that. So if you want to plant something once, one and done, plant it in the right place to begin with, where it's got room to grow, and then it's going to thrive in the conditions. Okay. Another thing we talk about is hardiness zones. The Southeast is hardiness zone 4 to 8. Cleveland County is in zone 7. Those can be used, but they're not, I wouldn't bet my life on them. For example, if you ever go to Blowing Rock, you see all those beautiful plants and flowers. You think, oh, I want to take that home and put that in my garden. Even though we're all in zone 7, and maybe up at higher elevations there, maybe a little different zone, how is it going to do down here in the summer in the heat? It's not, right? Growing conditions here in Cleveland County are tremendously different, even though we're in the same state and in the same zone, than they are up in the mountains with all the humidity, rain. The cool night temperatures are essential. Down here in the south, the hardiness zones were originally created to determine what the cold tolerance is. Okay, so you've got zones like 1 all the way up in Maine, and you've got zone 12 or 13 down in Puerto Rico. It's based on the temperatures, and that's based a lot on the cold temperatures. What can plants survive the coldest temperature? Down here in the south, I don't know what your experience is. My experience is I lose most of my stuff in the heat of the summer. So you got to take into account that as one of your very important variables in which of these plants you're going to choose to plant. On your plant tag, it's also going to give you some more interesting characteristics, like what color is the flower. Might even have a picture on some of them, which I find helpful. Somebody's going to have a fun day. You're going to have water requirements, flower color. Are they drought tolerant? Are they rabbit tolerant? I know a lot of us now, we start planting natives. You know what comes in when you start getting natives? You get native animals, which, you know, it's great. I love seeing the rabbits. I love seeing the squirrels and chipmunks. But I might not want to plant everything they're going to eat. I want to have some things that might withstand, especially the deer, foraging and digging up and whatever they're going to do. Another thing that's always important to me, and it will listed on some of these, is does it attract bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, or other birds? Is it a plant source? Is it a host source, a food source, a nectar source, something that our native flora and fauna can use to help them survive and live in our environment? Okay. One of the most important things we're going to talk about is sun and shade. It's the first foundation of that right plant, right place mantra. So if you think about where we're sitting now, even though we're technically in the shade, there's deep shade, there's filtered shade, there's part shade, there's places like right here. They may get morning sun. What's that going to be in the afternoon? It's going to be shade. So what you need to do is go out in your yard a couple of times a day. What they recommend is once in the morning, say 9 o'clock in the morning, early afternoon or around noon, and then maybe later in the afternoon. And just write down in your journal, in this particular place, what is my sunlight happening right now? So I may be here at 9:30 this morning, and I feel like I'm in dappled because I do see a little bit of light coming in. It's not like over there under that tree where the cars are parked by that wonderful darker shade. And then in the afternoon, this may be in complete sun. I don't know. Sun might come right through here. And it can scorch your plants if it gets too much direct sunlight. That's one of the main characteristics you want to think about. Is this plant going to get how much direct sunlight? Because the sunlight here, especially in the afternoon, is harsh and brutal, and it will kill and scorch your plants. So they might survive, like I said, but they're going to look scorched and they may not bloom or look as attractive as you want them to. So we have all different kinds of shade that we need to look at. Find our shade. The other important thing we need to look at is our soil, okay? In North Carolina, we have lots of clay, okay? As you go toward the coast, you get sand. As you go up toward the mountains, you get more of a richer, I think better growing type medium than we have here in Cleveland County. So, things you need to know about your soil is how does it drain? As you all know, sand and clay and loam and other things drain water and allow air in differently. Different plants have different air and water requirements in their soil. So that's something you're going to need to look at. Like I said, this can grow. This is very versatile. It can grow here as long as you don't water it too much. But I love to see it at the beach where it's just sprung up wild and it grows in the middle of the sand. Nobody's watering it, nobody's taking care of it. And it looks just as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than it does here when we're trying to grow it. That's what I like. I like plants I can plant once. They bloom year after year after year. I don't have to do a lot to them. And then they can just expand and grow, okay? Water. Like I said, even though we're in the same hardiness zone, we get different amounts of water. A lot of people have their irrigation systems, or you like to hand water, or what's really best is the drip irrigation method with like the drip hoses, or you can have this drip irrigation installed. That way a lot of the water is not wasted out into the atmosphere. It all soaks down into the soil where the plant can use it. So we need to know our water requirements. Those are also on your little card. Another concept that we have and that I have noticed in my plants is especially the native plants, is the first year they're going to sleep. So you may plant this the first year and this is all it's going to do. The second year it's going to kind of branch out a little bit, check things out. Everything's good. The next year you're going to have what we call a leap, which is where this plant is going to explode, which is what my two-leafed little split leaf Rebecca did, and it's like 8 feet tall. But it's beautiful, and I can't wait to see it flower. But planning ahead saves you work later. I think the old carpenter mantra is you measure twice, so you cut once, right? So you don't have to go get more supplies and do more things and redo the work. That's the same thing with gardening. Research it twice, make sure you know what you want to put where and is that a good spot for that. And that way you don't have to do like what I'm going to do and dig some things up and replant them in other places that are going to make them much more happier and they can spread out and bloom and grow. So, native plants are wonderful for our yards, our landscapes, our native fauna, our native flora, all of the critters that live around here. Helps us become part of a very essential food web ecosystem that helps support everything all the way up. If we don't have bugs, we don't have birds. If we don't have birds, we don't have mammals that eat the birds. If we don't have I mean, you just take it all the way up. It all starts here with the plants. The insects are what converts the plant energy to protein. That's what all the birds and the other critters want to get, it's protein. So we have to support our plants so that we can support our wildlife, okay? So what you want to do is set your goal, short and long term. Make a plan, look at your color scheme, plant, water when necessary, and then enjoy. And now Pat's going to tell you even more about how to design your landscape. Thank y'all. And if you'll pass those back around to me, because I do keep them, just so I know what I have, where I have it, and if I want some more of it, I know what to ask for to get it.
Residential homes, like, does anyone own like 10 or 15 acres that you're trying to maintain? Okay, so, or more? Four. So there are many options for native plants in the residential setting. A lot of people think that, oh, natives, you need a lot of room. You really don't. So today I'm hoping to expose you to native plants to include in your landscape that look nice, because a lot of people think that natives don't look, you know, they look wild. That they're easy to care for and support our local ecology, as all three of us have said. So how many of you live near a forest or have hiked in a forest or have seen a forest from afar? So a deciduous forest, that's a forest like these trees that lose their leaves. That's what deciduous is. Offers the most dramatic and easy way to recognize vertical layering. And you do a lot of vertical layering in your yard. You start tall, like the canopies of the trees, and then you do understory trees, and I'll talk more about what those are, and then the shrub layer, and then herbaceous, which are plants that die to the ground in the winter, the flowers mostly, and then the ground layer. So canopy trees, does anybody have an oak in their yard? Great. Oaks are so good for all kinds of insects, pollinators and others. And of course the birds are very attracted to them. The other one is a red cedar. See, I have a giant red cedar. And red maples, not the ornament Japanese maples, but a regular red maple. Yeah, I'm sorry, I keep moving because I can't see. So it's important to have those big trees, not only for shade, but for feeding all those wonderful insects and animals in your yard. The understory are things like the flowering dogwood, the redbud. I have a shade garden. I'll share some pictures. My neighbor decided she wanted more lawn, so she cut all her trees down, which backed up on my shade garden, so it's no longer completely shade. I have a gigantic maple, but the back side of it was shaded more from her trees. So I planted a chalk maple because I don't want it to interfere with my big maple, but I need something to protect those plants in the back. That one grows to about 15 to 30 feet. And I love it because it has branches that come out all the way up. It's not like the trunk and then an umbrella type of, it shades everything in front of it. Unfortunately, it's only about this big, so it's going to be a number of years before I have what I want. Also, in the shade garden, talking about animals in your yard, I had planted some Liriope, which is not native, but I wanted something that could tolerate the shade, that got fairly tall, to help on one end of my shade garden. And a beaver came up one night and chewed all 4 of them down and dragged them to the roof. So now I have the back side that's not shady and the left side that's not very shady. So you can plan for your yard, but those local animals will do as they wish. I mean, I'm not upset about it, but I need to think of some new things to plant. Then the shrubs are that are below the understory are like flame azalea. Those are azaleas not like the typical kind that you would buy at a food store or even in garden centers. They have these incredible flowers there, and they're not bushy. They have long arms and they are absolutely gorgeous. Buttonbush, which is great for ducks. They love to eat the little buttons after they flower, and they love shade, and they get like 8 foot wide, 8 foot tall, but they lose their leaves in the winter. So the oak leaf hydrangea is another one, and sweet shrub, which we have here. That's what this is. Carolina allspice. It has a number of, mine, I was telling someone before, is about 12 foot tall and almost as wide. It gets these gorgeous maroon flowers that are very attractive to the local insects. And then herbaceous is the next level down. Those are your flowers. So I'll talk about some shade ones. The dwarf crested iris is almost like a ground cover. Solomon seal, I thought I saw that here. This is Solomon seal. This is a little one. They get taller and spread out. They're gorgeous in the shade. I have one that's variegated also. That's even prettier. Allegheny Spurge is a type of ground cover.
Is that like Pachysandra?
It's in the Pachysandra family, but it's not Pachysandra. which is more invasive. The Allegheny Spurge gets a nice patch. It gets beautiful white flowers, and its leaves are much bigger than the regular pachysandra. Foam flower, I didn't see any of that here, but that's another great ground cover that gets these wonderful little flowers in the spring. And after a while, it'll just cover an area. There are also ephemerals that come up in the spring in the shade. They don't last very long. They're very pretty, but they die to the ground in the summer heat. One of those is bloodroot or trillium. If you go to the botanical gardens when they have their plant sale, they have those unusual ephemerals that are hard to find. And then the sun herbaceous plants are more like the coneflower. The typical coneflower uses inkworm. These are what are called cultivars. They've added, tried to make them so they come in different colors. They also have white. Nowadays you can, lime green is the other one. Seems like there are tons of them. Tickweed is a great Coreopus. That's another one that's good for the sun. Blanket flower, which Susie mentioned. Now, I have blanket flower, quite a bit of it, and it doesn't like clay, but I compost, and so every year, for the past 10 years, I've composted my soil and mulched it, and so now I have about 6 or 8 inches of really good soil, so it likes it. Penstemon is a great native plant. It gets about this tall, and the butterflies and the hummingbirds love it. Mountain mint, which is back here, the mountain mint doesn't look like much in this pot, but it gets a big area, and the insects, the pollinators, go crazy for these little flowers. But this is not something you would put in your flower bed because it will take over your flower bed. It's one of those natives you have to be careful with. But if you have an edge to your property, like I'm on the edge of a pine forest, so I planted it over there, and I don't care what it does. And the insects love it. Hydrangea is always a wonderful flower that loves sun. I have, at the top of my driveway, I planted some roses, and I planted those in front of the roses. So when the Japanese beetles come and destroy my roses, I still have those. So you kind of don't notice how sad the roses are because I don't really spray. I mean, if I really want to save my roses because someone is coming, I go out there with a little bucket of soapy water and knock them in. But you could do that for months, it seems like, and there'd still be more. Stokesia is an aster. That's what these are. These are wonderful. someone was saying theirs isn't doing real well. Yeah. And I was saying they like the heat and dry. You really don't want to water them too much or they kind of disappear on you. Joe Pye weed we were talking about is a great sun, attractive to every kind of pollinator and butterfly you can imagine. So, but they need wet feet. A lot of plants don't like wet feet, but they thrive. I have a giant patch of them down by my flagpole close to the lake, and that is the wettest part of my property. All winter long it's like a puddle, and every year those Joe Pye weed come streaming up. They love it. Gora is this wonderful, some people call it butterfly plant because these little flowers look like butterflies, because it gets taller and the wind blows them. I was saying this is the pink one. I have some white ones, and the white variety gets taller. Mine are about this tall, and they reseed all over the place. I have them on the edge of my rock beds. I have all these rock beds because I'm at the bottom of the hill to collect the water that comes down the hill. So I planted them on the edge. They reseeded right in the rock bed, and they love it. I mean, they drown when it rains, and then they dry out when there's no rain, like right now, but they're still blooming. And the only other one I thought I'd mention is Hyssop, because it's such an attractive to pollinators. And it tends to not be too invasive because it sends seeds out, but it doesn't fly over to other areas. And it gets almost as tall as me. One year I decided in front of my lilies I wanted to plant something native that would kind of block them when they got ugly, you know, when they were done. So I decided on Hyssop. It was like a joke because it hid my lilies so much that the next year they didn't bloom because they were in the shade the whole summer. They weren't collecting the photosynthesis that they needed. So I yanked those out and planted those elsewhere. So I guess I'll just repeat that natives are low maintenance and they sustain the landscape, and you can make good choices for your own landscape to you know, help the environment really. So I'm not going to repeat some of the other stuff, but I do want to mention a few plants. This is Virginia's sweet spire, and it doesn't look like much now, but let me pick one off. It gets these incredible white flowers that come off all over the place in the spring. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I have them as you come down my driveway. They're native, and they don't mind water, and they don't mind dry, but they need to have some water. You can't put them someplace where they don't get any. But when we talked about layering, you know, that this this can be in the shade or or sun. Same thing with this one. Now this gets maybe a little taller, but that's it. This one gets gigantic, 10 to 12 feet high. So if you had, and you never plant them this close. Susie was talking about how you have to be clear about how much space to plant for the growth. So you'd probably wind up, so 3 of those and 1 of these in the back, and it would look kind of like something's missing. But you need to be careful, because if you plant so that it looks great right now, you will be digging it up next year, because these plants get big, this one in particular. And so if there's sun on that side, you could, how tall does this phlox get? I'm not familiar with this one. Do you know, Martha?
She said, how tall does it get? It's a creeper, not a...
Yeah.
Like,
So you could do a creeper around the edge. So
It would make a good ground cover.
yeah, if you needed a ground cover, or if you wanted to add color. So this would be white in the spring. This would be red flowers later, maroon later on in the spring. Now they're done. And so these would start, these are in the spring only. So you have to be careful that you don't plant everything that blooms in the spring, and then in the summer it's kind of blah. You don't have them. Or you could, these are summer bloomers. That would probably look nice too, keeping in mind that you should have 3 of these. It depends on where you're going to put them. But the danger is to buy just one thing. Oh, that's pretty. I want that one thing as a specimen plant. But then it's by itself. You stick it in the yard and it's kind of pretty, but it blooms only a certain time of the year. So if you can keep in mind this layering and clustering, 3s, 5s, 7s are good numbers for plants. And the other one that I wanted to mention, these are what are called cultivars of the original Hydrangea Aborissas. These are called Incredible. They're hydrangeas. Mine is already blooming. It has flowers like that on it. So you can add cultivars in with your natives. Don't get yourself so crazy that you can only have a native. But hydrangeas of any kind, even the natives, are not particularly good for insects, because that round ball has those tiny little flowers with almost no pollen. But it's a good host plant. So in my big hydrangea, I watched a cardinal feed its baby. It went over and got a moth, and then went back and sat in the hydrangea and fed. I wish I had the right camera for it. It was beautiful. So you can mix things. The only other thing I'll say to you is plan ahead. Don't go to the nursery and say, oh, that's pretty. I'm gonna get that. And then you go home and you're not quite sure where to put it or what to put it with. And the prettiness disappears in a month because it's a spring flower. So there has to be a lot of planning ahead. At least have in mind, do you want a middle-sized plant, a taller one, or a small one to fit in with what you have?